Hello, Arlene, and hello, everyone. Welcome to Ecology Presents. How are you today, Arlene?
I'm great, thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you, Kristen.
I am so thrilled to do this. We've been talking about this. Well, I guess you and I have been talking about this a little bit secretly for longer than a month. But yeah, we're thrilled to be here. I am thrilled to be here with Arlene Amitirigala. I have her website up at the bottom of the screen there, trulyarlene.com. Arlene is a special friend of Ecology. I met Arlene months ago through a different group of ours called Fearless Brands, through our friend Greg Monaco, who is a stellar human being, as are you. And Arlene and I have gotten to know each other. Turns out Arlene is a fellow Canadian. So I obviously have a special place in my heart for Arlene. She is an accomplished communications professional. And I know that we're going to learn so much from her today. She is based out of Toronto, but I know she's going to give you a little more background on her story. So thank you, everyone, for coming in today. Please use the comment section to ask questions, to chat, to make comments. I'm going to be monitoring those. We're going to do questions at the very end of Arlene's presentation. So I will be monitoring those. I'll keep track of them. We'll make sure we get to all of them at the end. I am going to not waste more time because I know we have all kinds of interesting content to cover here. So I will let Arlene take it away from here. I have your slides up on the screen, Arlene. I am going to remove myself because everyone wants to hear from you today. And I will let you take it away.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to explore how we can practice more inclusive storytelling as internal communicators. This is my first time presenting on the LinkedIn Live platform, so I'm super excited about that, all this technology innovation. But firstly, I want to start the session with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that the land upon which I sit is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So many of you listening to this session today are internal communicators. And I've spent over a dozen years leading internal communications. And one of the things I used to say is that it was about helping people fall in love with a company, every day. And if we think about some of the things that make us fall in love, it's about feeling seen. It's about being heard. It's about knowing that we matter. It's about feeling included. And that's the gift that internal communicators can bring to this area, providing internal communications through the lens of inclusive storytelling that helps people feel as if they really belong and helps diversity to thrive. So communication should aim to be that beacon. It should aim to bring everyone along that journey of change, because it is a journey of change that leads to inclusion. And we're seeing that increasingly these days. So that's the one thing I want to make sure we all feel in this moment before we even launch into more of this discussion, that we do have the power to make a difference and we can spark change and we know how to do this and we can get better at it. This whole notion of inclusive storytelling. But what do we need? We need a strategy and we need an action plan. So let's dive in to the beginning. Let's call the beginning a bit of my story. Who am I in the context of this conversation? So, wow, I'm live with a picture of myself at 2 years old. I was born in Jamaica and I lost my parents at a very young age. By the age I am in that photo of 2, my father had already deceased. And my brother and I, we grew up with our grandparents. Now, there's an interesting thing. My grandfather was born in 1899, so it was as wide a generational gap as you can imagine. And so our household, our childhood experience was very different from that of my friends at school, who were growing up with their parents and led a more contemporary existence and did things that I think, young parents would do, simple things like going to a fast food restaurant. In contrast, my life was very formal. So, for example, I went to church tea parties with my grandmother. And it's not that I was suffering, but at times I felt very different. Mother's Day and Father's Day were not the same for me. And so growing up, I would often feel like I didn't belong or like I was excluded from something. And this was not through any fault, any express intention of someone. It was just the circumstances. And that's one of the points about exclusion. Sometimes it happens unintentionally, but what's key is that we discover it, uncover it, bring it to life, discuss it so we can change it. Now, I've lived in several different countries, and this photo that you're seeing here is when I went to high school in Chile, Santiago, Chile. And when I moved there weren't many people who looked like me. People would stare at me. People would try to touch my skin, or they would try to touch my hair. They would take pictures of me secretly. And it was my first real exposure to multiple cultures and different ways of doing things, because we went to an American international high school. And I'll never forget that first day getting onto the school bus, and I was seated between an Israeli and a South African, and across from me was my Jewish friend who is from Curacao. Well, she's my friend now. She became my good friend. And I was getting questions left, right, from all angles, and my mind was blown. I went on to live in Switzerland. I've lived in Belgium, in the UK, in the US for a long stint. I did a short stint in Japan. Now I'm here in Canada. And I've learned a lot about myself, and I've learned a lot about people throughout all my travels. Through it all, Jamaica is home. And Jamaica has very strong brand recognition. All the places I've visited, very often, whenever I said Jamaica, their eyes would light up. Our country, my country, is a melting pot of cultures. And our motto is out of many, one people. And I believe that our strength comes from embracing the tremendous diversity that unfolded throughout the course of our history. And whenever I think about what is right and what is good about my country, I think it is rooted in our decision to embrace all of these cultures. And by extension, I think of what is possible when you seek to include, and what's possible when we really get inclusive storytelling right. So now let's touch a little bit on why I'm the one having this conversation, why me? And then we'll talk about, well, why you and why now? So the genesis or the awakening to this whole area of inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging, whether you call it DEI or EDI, was something that happened about 11 years ago when I was working in corporate. And I was part of a team building exercise at work. It was simple enough. We were dropped into the desert, we were stranded, and we were given a list of supplies which we had to rank in order of importance. We were supposed to discuss this as a team and decide together. So there was this thing on the list called sunscreen. And I don't know if you know where this is going, but a colleague of mine said sunscreen definitely has to be at the top of the list. Admittedly, this was not one of my finest communication moments. I said, that's ridiculous. And then there was silence. My colleague didn't speak again. The rest of us continued with the exercise. So, I was the only non-white member of this group doing the exercise. In fact, I was the only non-white member in the room. And I And while people like me with more melanin do use sunscreen, I just literally hadn't thought of it as the top thing I would have put on the list. So I didn't realize this until my colleague gave me feedback. Being white with very fair skin, it was essential to him, and he put it at the top of his list. We're stranded in the desert, blazing sun. And I share this story, even though it, might be very out of mind for you. I share this story to say two things. One is that we have blind spots. And there's a big role of communication in listening and engaging to create understanding. What if during the activity I had asked him, well, why do you think sunscreen should be at the top of the list? Or what if he had volunteered and said, well, let me explain why I think it should be at the top of the list? And the second thing I want to highlight from this experience, in addition to blind spots, when it comes to communicating around inclusion and diversity, is there is discomfort. Yes, discussing these things can feel uncomfortable, but we have to be willing to lean into that discomfort and engage in complex conversations. So why you? Well, first, to springboard, that experience, believe it or not, led to a deeper interest in this whole area of diversity, inclusion, etc. And I started to read more, acquire more knowledge, first very focused on women in the workplace, and then it broadened into other interests. And I got training, and I became one of the inclusive leadership facilitators in the corporate environment, in addition to getting outside qualification. So here I am, and it's my opportunity to share this information with others as a learning exchange, because I learn when I share and I'm enriched by other viewpoints. So why should you be engaged with it and want to learn? Well, for one thing, I think it will benefit you personally and professionally. It will benefit you in your role as an internal communicator, building greater engagement within your business. And it will benefit you as you play a wider role in society and in your community. And why now? Well, there's this Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is, well, 10 years, best time 10 years ago, second best time, now. I think now, especially as we grapple with all of these different social justice movements, and where we're still racked by the various injustices and inequities that exist, this is a great time to get involved, to dive in, and to learn more. So just a little bit of grounding in this conversation. When we talk about inclusion and diversity, we also have to talk about equity and belonging. And it's important to do so because there are these systems of oppression that exist that frame our thinking, frame how we have operated across society for decades, hundreds of years, centuries. And I did a course with Fearless Futures, and I've put them on the slide. You can see it on the screen. You can visit their website, and I highly recommend them. If you're interested in doing any deep dive into inclusion work, they have this fantastic course called Design for Inclusion. It's over a week. You go deep, but you walk away with some fantastic skills to build strategy related to inclusion and diversity in your business. And they teach about various systems of oppression around which we've built our societies, around which we've built our workplaces. And I've just put a few examples on the screen. Disableism, sexism, heterosexism, Islamophobia, classism, racism. And these exist. You can actually listen to a fantastic podcast that they have where they break these down and they give you an understanding of what's behind a system of oppression. And in a synopsis, hopefully I can do it justice, you have 4 components. One is there's a negative idea at the root of it, some negative idea floating around a particular group of people. And then there's a conditional response to that negative idea when these negative ideas are seen to be true. And then you get the structures that enforce it. These are laws, these are policies, these are institutions that bake it in before you even realize that this is what has happened. So if we take the case of disability, for example, having metro stations or subway stations where there's absolutely no access for those with a physical disability is a manifestation of a negative idea and a conditioned response becoming baked into a structure and how you approach a way of doing things. If you hadn't had those things at the very beginning, that negative idea, then you'd have been thinking more inclusively. And the fourth piece is the outcome. There is always an outcome of these systems of oppression. And sometimes those outcomes are deadly. Now, what happens when you try to solve for one of these? And this concept fascinates me because if you think you're building a house and you say, you know what, I'm going to build a door that men can enter through. Okay, we'll build a door that women can enter through. Okay, now we'll build a door that that Black people can come through. Oh no, but hold on, what if it's a Black man? Do we need a separate door for that? Or what about if you have a pavilion? No doors, it's open. And that's what thinking inclusively is about. It's recognizing that there's intersectionality. So you have to solve for all. You might be at different stages of solving, but you have to be thinking that broad perspective and solving for all and creating the widest door possible so that all can enter. Now, when we think about systems of oppression, there's a big question that goes along with it. And we're going to sit with this question for a second. Who benefits? Always ask this question. Who benefits from this system? Who benefits from this structure? Because the truth is that if there are negative ideas about one group, then there are favorable ideas about the other group, that the other group benefits from. Through no doing of their own, it entrenches their privilege and makes it invisible. Now, by virtue of being able to sit here together at this time and partake in a presentation, have access to this technology, we are privileged. And sometimes it feels uncomfortable to admit that. Yes, I am privileged. I've traveled across many countries. I've had many opportunities. I've pursued higher education. And when I don't stop to think of how some of those privileges came to exist, and I think it was just through my hard work, then I fall into the trap of negating other groups and not understanding what is true for them. So the question I would ask after you consider who benefits and you think through these things, ask yourself as an internal communicator, how can I be part of the change? And the answer, the number one answer, so start with you. Start with you. Start at the beginning. And what do I mean by that? Understand who you are. What are your values? What is your knowledge base? Get under the skin of your own biases because they exist. Sometimes it's like a thread running through your head and you don't realize. Go all the way back. I don't know if you can see those words inscribed here beneath tips for storytelling. Those are the words in ancient Greece inscribed on the footsteps of the Temple of Delphi. Know thyself. So that's the beginning of it when you come into this role as a communicator who's going to make a difference. And then you have to start practically. Expand your circle. And this is true for life as well as for work. This gives you the opportunity to change your mind, to celebrate difference. And when you expand your circle as a communicator, you'll start to include other sources. You'll get other stories. You'll be including other faces. They will see themselves in the messages being created. They will feel seen. They will know they're heard. They, maybe, just maybe, will fall in love and want to stay. And then the fourth point is seek resources for your own learning and growth. And this is where you have to take responsibility. So this slide is just all about you getting grounded, understanding yourself, expanding your circle, and then taking responsibility to seek out your learning and growth. So moving on, foster belonging. And some of the ways I suggest we do this: apply an inclusive lens, the images you use, the documents that you create, the videos, the podcasts, the events. Who is on the stage? Who are people seeing? You must have this inclusive lens. And when we talk about the language, I share a story. So very much like we have this wonderful platform, Ecology, where internal communicators can get together and share ideas and grow together. I used to meet up with peer communicators. And I remember one particular session, a peer communicator and we were exchanging messages, to show each other samples of things we'd written. And I'd written this message that I thought was pretty spot on. Poof. And she read it and she said, "Oh my goodness, is this how you speak in your company? You're gonna beat the competition, you're gonna win the war, and you're in the trenches right now and you're gonna come out swinging." She said, it sounds really violent and alienating. And I thought to myself, wow, I thought this was rah, rah, rah. But was it inclusive? She couldn't see herself in that language. It didn't speak to her. So that's one thing to know when we talk about applying an inclusive lens. And then as an internal communicator, you have a big role to play in fostering belonging in meetings and having inclusive practices. So very often, well, we know the drill. We're called in, we're going to meet with the IT team or the finance team or the marketing team. They have a big project. They want us to sit in and support, etc. So we go into it. It's a great opportunity to observe meeting dynamics. Are people being allowed to finish a sentence? Are people being interrupted? Is anyone being excluded from the conversation? When you are going to attend these meetings, if they ask you for a presentation, could you send it beforehand? We work in global environments. There might be non-English speakers or whatever language it is that the meeting is being conducted in. There could be non-native speakers of that language who would appreciate the opportunity to look up a few terms or words. Even your native speakers might appreciate that opportunity. Are you running over time? Are you going to signal? Will you take breaks? Not all disabilities are visible. Sometimes people process things from a cognitive difference and they need that extra time. Or there's a reason why they need that physical break. So do you give those signals? And if there's actual bias or exclusionary statements made during the meeting, how do you interrupt that? Because you do need to. And then the last point is inhabit other worlds, seek different examples to bring stories to life for your team. So you can read new sources. You might wonder, why is Rihanna on this slide? Rihanna is on this slide because of this exact point, seeking different examples. I remember being in an executive team meeting and all of the execs going around the room, we were talking about innovation and we had asked for examples from corporate environments, etc. They were citing names like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, And it was pretty much like that. That was the genre going around the room. And then I said, I just wanted to introduce the example of Rihanna and creating Fenty Beauty, which targets an underserved community, which was largely invisible from beauty practices, beauty standards, beauty products. And there was pause in the room. It's a different voice, it's a different example. Now, if we can mix that into the range of examples that we're going to put forward to employees when we're talking about innovation, we're doing so through a more inclusive lens where more people can see themselves. And then moving on, get curious. And this is a gift that internal communicators have. In fact, communication folks in general, especially if you're coming from journalism, like I am. You're going to ask a lot of questions. You're going to be taking your notes. You want to know why. You're looking for that next story. But here, in the context of inclusive storytelling, it's being curious about other perspectives. So you have to use listening skills, and you have to use your engagement skills to promote dialogue. And if you can see the fine point below, these are 4 engagement skills that promote dialogue coming from Catalyst. So Catalyst is an organization that was founded some years ago. They started looking particularly at women in the workplace because the rationale was what you do to help women thrive has spin-offs for wider communities and wider groups. That was the original thinking. But they came up with this framework. And number 1, to demonstrate vulnerability. That was similar to what I did at the beginning. You heard my story, and I didn't strut in to say I'm perfect. I wanted to let you know I messed up as a communicator. I shut down conversation. I didn't listen. I didn't think inclusively. So you have to demonstrate that kind of vulnerability and self-disclosure to help open up dialogue. And then as you listen, suspend judgment. We come up with all sorts of reasons when we don't listen. But what's key is to stand in someone else's shoes and see through their eyes, understand their lived experience, and suspend judgment. And then finally, inquire across differences. 3 words. Lean in and say, tell me more. Just 3 words, inquire across differences. And then, particularly important for us as communicators, choose a diverse group of internal influencers. I'm sure all of us, if I could see you right now and I say, raise your hand if you're busy using internal influencers, you would say, yes, absolutely. How else am I going to penetrate certain teams and get my message across? But who are you choosing for your internal influencers? Is it a favorite? Is it the person who speaks the same language as you do? Is it the person in the lunchroom who you're most comfortable with? As we said at the beginning, step out, expand your circle, and be more intentional about choosing others to be your internal influencers. And then finally, for this segment, access the resources that you need to be able to carry this through in your company environment and also for your own growth, and build a strategy. So now let's get into the second half of the conversation. And I realize, we're halfway through time, so I will speed up a little bit. I don't want to speak too fast. I want it all to land. So be strategic. So look at the pillars in your EDI or DEI strategy. And in fact, let me step back because, when I thought about being strategic, I thought about five Ps. We used to build our plan and talk about the 3 Ps: people, performance, and purpose. But I thought about it. It could be 5 Ps. It's your purpose. It's your people. It's their performance. It's a company profit. And it's the participation. And they're all navigating in that same space, the 5 Ps. There was one for marketing, but no, this is one for inclusive storytelling. Because even beyond your organization, you're looking at participation that extends into community. And how are you thinking about that in your inclusive framework? So look at the pillars in your strategy, the strategy that exists at a company level. If it doesn't exist, a lot of companies are just building theirs now. You need to be a part of it. And if you're not, ask, invite yourself to the table. And then define your key messages coming out of that strategy. Very often these strategies are written in a language and an approach that's not digestible. So coming from that, you define your key messages. Then you build your narrative. And in that narrative, you need to have your proof points as a company. The proof points that you're actually interested in doing something about this, building greater inclusion and diversity and equity in the company. And proof points of what you've already achieved and what you want to achieve. Create a global story. A lot of organizations operate on a global level. Say you're headquartered in Paris. Fine. Is the team in the Philippines going to connect to that global story as well? It will. They will, if you infuse it with local content. So that's extremely important. Make it relatable. Wow. And at first I was going to title this slide, "Don't make it corporate." But I said, you know what, let's put it in the positive. Make it relatable. I was in a session yesterday and someone said something that landed deeply for me. He said, it's not about spreading the word, it's about spreading the meaning. Because you're not communicating for communication's sake. There's a message with meaning that's intended to touch someone and change hearts and minds. So that's the first thing I would say, focus on the meaning. Second one is plan your communications. Yes, we're all planners. I think it's about remembering that the best messages, even though they might seem spontaneous and we did it quickly or the person delivered it easily, those are the most researched, the most rehearsed, and the most fine-tuned over time. So plan your communications rigorously, particularly when it relates to the space of inclusion. And on that note, solve for all in your messages. We touched on this and intersectionality. Don't solve for just one group. Don't highlight just one group, and don't make it tokenistic at all. But just as the policies in your company have to look at exclusionary practices on a broad scale, you need to do the same thing with all of the language, all of the channels that you choose to use so that they're inclusive, right? Choose your messenger and equip them well, but don't spoon feed. So let me dig into this a little bit. Very often when we are doing our EDI messaging, it starts at a very high level with the C-suite. And we know it can be very corporate at that stage because very often we wrote it. And if you know Steve Crescenzo, I'm sure you've heard of Steve Crescenzo, Steve and Cindy, master internal communicators. Steve always, he uses this phrase, don't write for the approver, write for the reader. And so avoid that whole PR-y speech. Make sure they're telling it from the heart. So you help them with the bullet points or you help them with a narrative, but they have to be connected to it. They have to have their own story to bring it to life so that they can have the necessary impact that you're seeking. Now, one thing I want to mention when we say, tell it from the heart and don't make it corporate, is that there is a temptation when you're writing your narrative that you want to paint your company in a good light. and give the impression, enshrined in our way of being, and this has always been the tenets, and the language. And this can make any members of your community who are marginalized or who feel any measure of discomfort, it can make them feel even more uncomfortable and unseen. So your messages, in being relatable, they have to be real, they have to be authentic. And if you're working with ERGs, the employee resource groups, and they're in charge of doing a lot of that storytelling, then equip them to become better storytellers by teaching them simple frameworks, giving them coaching, giving them training, because they are internal influencers. And I know sometimes it's already burdensome on them, so help to make their job much easier. So for the next few minutes, I'll just talk about a little bit of the storytelling side of things and the executional versus the strategy. So we use stories to change people's minds. You have to be using stories. It's natural, it's relevant for business. You use them to make emotional connections, to prompt action, and to deliver your vision. I'm sure you've all been in that kind of session where when somebody started with a story, you were hooked. It lets you into their world, you were able to relate, and you could shift. And it's more effective to share best practice or successes that way. Now, the other executional pieces, you need to mine those stories at work. Collect the stories, practice the story listening, gather stories that amplify the culture shift and the behaviors that you want to amplify. Broadcast those stories across your business regularly. Recognize the heroes in the story and help everyone see that we can be heroes in that same scenario and create a sustainable cycle of stories. Now, you can do this easily by setting up some kind of framework or database, because I'm talking specifically about inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging, shaping those stories, relating them to your people, to performance, to profits, and to wider participation. So you can eke out those different themes across all the various themes and teams in your business. Give them a framework, say to them, just bullet point this, who was involved, and then you can support in collecting and fleshing out what actually happened and what's the lesson for it. There are lots of corporate style questions you can ask, but when you have the one-on-one opportunity, you can ask employees, you can ask leaders in conversation. Tell me about a time when you felt included. What difference did it make to you and the outcome of the project? So use these questions and provide these questions to leaders so that they can start figuring out what are some of the stories coming through from their team, the success stories. And then coming down to the end, run your own newsroom. You got to plan for the year ahead. Organizations have cycles. What's happening? How can you link your communications to it? You know that March is going to be Women's History Month, for example. So what are the things that you're going to do during March? But not only March, what are you going to do in January? What are you going to do in August? Plan. Use the databases that you've created through the story mining, but also your company databases. Can you go back into the archives? Can you research any success stories? And leverage both internal and external events. And I say the external events because we operate in reality. Your employees are living, breathing human beings. They're watching the news. They have emotions. You can contextualize for your employees what's happening in the world in terms of policy, company policy, and the position that you take or that you support as an organization. As I talk, what comes to mind is when George Floyd, when that happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement rose up to the fore, and the social justice protests and demonstrations were happening. It was a tough time for me, being who I am. And what I'll never forget is one day my president, he texted me. He said, because I wasn't living in the US at the time, I wasn't living in Canada at the time. And he said, "How are you? I know your family is in the US. Are they okay? How are you?" And that simple action meant so much more to me than a corporate note, email, recognizing performance or acknowledging something. That simple act of recognizing my humanness and what I was experiencing in that moment meant a lot. And it was related to external events outside the company. A lot of companies made a mistake during that time. They were silent on an issue that they needed to speak about. They weren't prepared. They didn't have the kind of skills or framework to think about those matters tied in with inclusion and diversity, what they're doing in a company. So it's time for us as internal communicators to be better prepared and to build the muscle of internal inclusive storytelling. And then finally, share a calendar, but be nimble, right? So your calendar is going to run for the whole year, and it has to, because you're not only going to talk about these things during Women's History Month. You're not only going to talk about it in June during Pride Month. It has to be sustained. It has to be interwoven with the narrative, the stories, the sectors, the areas within the business. But listen, we're masters of the obscure and of ambiguity. We know how to shift as communicators, so absolutely stay nimble. And that brings me to the final 3 points. It's progress over perfection. Don't get paralyzed thinking you have to get it perfect. You're going to make mistakes, hopefully not big ones, but it's from the big mistakes that you learn. If you don't make a mistake, you're not going to learn. It's important to get it out there. You could be writing your strategy for 8 months. 8 months while employees are thinking there's no strategy, my company doesn't care about this. Think progress over perfection. The second one is measure and evaluate. You want to do an audit. You want to measure your channels. You want to measure your messages. You want to measure how it's landing. Is it inclusive? Develop markers and frameworks so that you can measure and evaluate and improve. And then finally, celebrate the results. Celebrate the journey. Celebrate the climb. Celebrate being at the top. Celebrate the wins, because that fuels your energy to continue, and it fuels your energy to celebrate even more successes. And that is the presentation portion for today. I hope we have 15 minutes left. I know that Kristen is going to pop back in at some point, and perhaps we can take a look at what's been going on in the comments. We can see if you've had any questions or thoughts. And
thank you, Arlene.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
What an incredible 45 minutes this has been. I've been furiously writing notes the whole time. I know other people have too. Now, Arlene, it is just you and I on the screen. So if you want to get rid of your slides so you can see that, that is totally up to you.
Okay.
I've been monitoring the questions and the comments and everything else. So if folks have questions, please put them in the comment section. Or if you have, stories that you want to share, anything like that, we'd love to hear from them. I want to say, first and foremost, I want to say thank you, Arlene, for your vulnerability in sharing a lot of your personal story at the beginning of the session. I know it's not easy to share those things. Um, I think it's a very powerful context for us to understand your background and where you're coming from, and also the life experience that you're bringing to the communications world. Do you think, or I guess the answer is yes, but how do you think that background has helped you in your professional life?
That's a great question, Kristen. And one of the things I recognized from early is that it has given me one, an optimism,
Okay.
because, tough things can happen at any point in life, but we can rise and we can thrive. So I have this endless optimism, partly fueled by the fact that I had to come face to face with mortality when I was very young. So I know that life is short,
Yeah.
and I want to maximize on it, and I want to embrace as many people throughout this short life as I can. And internal communications, or communications in general, became a real gift for me because of, to fuel that philosophy, to
Well,
embrace and touch as many people.
you are a gift to communications and to our industry. I know that so many people who, I shouldn't say so many people who would have gone through what you've gone through would not see that as optimism, or wouldn't fuel optimism. So I think that speaks to the work that you've done personally and the growth that you've experienced personally. So thank you for sharing that with us. I loved your point also, and I think it's an important piece for us to remember as communicators. And I will say this publicly: it is an especially important piece for us to remember as white women, the piece of intersectionality. Because if you are practicing and preaching feminism, for example, but you are excluding trans women, as an example, you're not practicing feminism. And so there are all of these compartments and that you listed. Here's an example of some buckets, we'll call them, in diversity and inclusion, but we'll never be able to list all of them. So let's stop worrying about listing all of them and just break down the doors in general.
Yes. That was a big realization for me because, back in the day, Kristen, and I'm sure you relate, we were really getting into segmenting the groups. Okay, we're going to start with
Yes.
women. We'll address those needs first. Okay, and then we'll address the needs of the LGBTQ plus community. And then, but that doesn't work, because
Right.
then you have a whole group of people saying, well, what about me? And
Yeah.
then you have the group that sits at the intersection point, a gay woman saying, okay, well, I'm in both, but you're serving one half of me, but I'm a whole person. And I got
Absolutely.
to bring my whole self to work.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And another point of that, and then I've got a question here that came in. One thing I will say that I learned that I hadn't thought of was violent undertones in language. When you gave that example of this, the front lines and winning the battle. And you know what? I think that is especially important right now, with everything going on in Ukraine. And I truly hadn't thought of that. And we use that undertone often in communication. So I love that you brought that up. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're
Now, I've
welcome,
got a
Kristen.
question here I'm going to pull up on the screen from Zane. How can we encourage leaders to become open to these conversations when they don't see this as an issue that they need to be concerned with? I have an answer for Zane, but I'm going to let Arlene answer first.
Oh, Kristen, I want you to answer first while I think about that
Okay,
and
you think of something
chill.
more intelligent to say than I'm going to say, because my answer is find a new job. But that's my point blank kind of response to that. I say that half kidding. The only reason I say that is because there are so many times where communicators, and I will say particularly internal communicators, will say at conferences or sessions like this, well, our top leadership doesn't see our employees as a valuable resource, or our top leadership doesn't think diversity and inclusion is important. What do I do to convince them otherwise? And often I'm like, you might not. Like, you might not be the person to be able to convince them. You might need to find another job or be on the lookout for another job, because I don't know how to convince someone to care.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you've said it perfectly, Kristen. And the challenge that we face, because it's an excellent question, Zane, is how do we support them in feeling included in this process and this conversation?
Oh, that's a great way of looking at it. That's much
Because
more emotionally intelligent than my response.
because very very often the resistance comes from a place of fear, and we experience a fear because there's something unknown. And there's a part of empathy and compassion where we bring more information to the table for them. We support them in feeling included in this conversation, in this process. We provide some kind of training. And then ultimately, what I've seen at the highest levels is it's linked to performance, which does become a very tough stage because you don't want to get to that alienating part of it. But it is a journey of acknowledging them. If they haven't been listened to, they will not listen. So let's start by listening very closely. What are their concerns? What are they feeling? What is their fear? And then we can hope to be listened to.
That's so powerful, Arlene. Thank you. Yeah, what an emotionally intelligent way to approach that, from the standpoint of, I guess, in a way, the assumption that there is some confusion or fear on their part about not being included. And maybe there's a way, as an internal communicator, that you can set up, a conversation or a lunch and learn or something like that, and invite that leader to be a part of it, to include them. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
If the challenge is inclusion, let's also include the folks who are afraid of
Yes.
having those
And
conversations.
and using those four engagement skills that promote dialogue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's the vulnerability, self-disclose, suspend judgment. Yes, all of those skills.
That's so powerful. Another powerful note that I took down was, when you're not sure, when someone says something to you, you're not sure how to respond, that "tell me more" is the most powerful phrase that you could use. I need to use that phrase more. Likely we all do. It's such a
Yes.
great response when if you are thinking to yourself, "Oh, I don't know what to say right now," say that. Say, "Tell me more."
And
Yeah.
listen. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, what a wonderful piece of advice. The other quote, and I know it's not your quote, you said you heard someone else say that
Oh
it's
my
not about spreading the word, it's about spreading the meaning. And this,
gosh.
this relates to that powerful quote about people will forget what you did and what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Right? This is the
Yes.
power of emotion and the power of emotional intelligence. It's not about it's in many ways, it's not about spreading the word, it's that meaning behind it, and how are we capturing that.
Yes. It was a
Yeah,
mic drop moment. I was like,
absolutely.
what?
Yeah, that's why I wrote it down, and I had to put it on this little banner on the screen so we could all remember it.
Thank you.
The last thing I will make a note of, that's a great tip for internal and external communications, is run your own newsroom. I love that concept. I have not heard that concept before. I think it's phenomenal. The last corporate job I had, we had a similar idea where we were kind of like, let's run our own agency within this company, right? That's how we need to see our team. But I love the idea of running your own newsroom, with the messages getting out there and deadlines and all of that. I think that's a great concept for all of us.
Yes.
Arlene, this is so powerful. Thank you so much. We will have a recording available for Ecology members only. So you must be an Ecology member to view the recording. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We are having another Ecology Present session next month on April 28th. And the topic is going to be all of the things you ever wanted to know about consulting and self-employment in internal comms, which I know everyone loves that topic. I love that topic too. So mark your calendars for April 28th. We will be back here for Ecology Presents. Arlene, you are a gift to this industry. I am so glad that
Thank
I met
you.
you. I am so appreciative of your time today and everything that you've shared with us. To connect with Arlene, please reach out to her if you are looking for a wonderful way to get some guidance on your internal comms strategy or shaping your own internal comms narrative, especially that storytelling piece. Please visit trulyarlene.com. I know Arlene would be a wonderful resource for you. We've got lots of love in the chat here for you, people saying thank you. So thank you, Arlene. Thank you to everyone else. Appreciate everyone being here. And again, if you're looking for information about ecology, of course, we would love to have you join us at joinecology.com. Thank you, Arlene. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone else. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.